Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're really diving into something quite crucial, a recent report on poverty in Hong Kong. And we're going way beyond just the headlines. We're really trying to get a grasp on what's actually happening in one of the most expensive cities in the world.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating study, and it reveals some pretty stark realities about income inequality and what it takes to maintain these social safety nets in a place that's changing so rapidly.
Our main source for this deep dive is a report from Oxfam Hong Kong, and wow, some of the numbers are really alarming.
Definitely.
They found over 1.395 million people living below the poverty line in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
That's 20.2% of the population. Is that even possible? It's a huge number. And what's even more concerning is that this represents, get this, a 17% surge in the number of households living in poverty since before the pandemic.
Okay.
So this isn't just a one-time thing. It's actually a growing problem.
17%, it's a massive jump.
It is.
And it really makes you think about how much worse the pandemic made things, especially for people who are already struggling. But before we get too far, can you just paint a picture for us? What does it actually mean to be living below the poverty line in Hong Kong?
So the report defines the poverty line as HK $5,000 per month for a single person and HK $11,300 for a two-person household. So now try to imagine, just imagine trying to survive in a city like Hong Kong. I mean, this is a place known for sky-high rent, cost of living through the roof on just about US $640 a month if you're single, or a bit more than double that for two people. I mean, it's incredibly difficult.
It's just really hard to even wrap your head around how you could make that amount of money stretch far enough in a city like Hong Kong.
Yeah.
It makes you think about all the things we take for granted.
For sure it does. And it highlights another really critical issue that the report really dives into, and that is the widening income gap in Hong Kong. So the report states that the highest earning households in Hong Kong earn, get this, 81.9 times more than the lowest earning households.
81.9 times, that's just mind-blowing.
Right.
I mean, what even contributes to such a big gap like that?
Well, it's definitely not just one thing. It's this complex kind of interplay of a few different factors. So you've got housing costs, which are just outrageous and eat up a huge chunk of people's income, especially those at the lower end. And then you've got this wage stagnation thing happening. A lot of jobs just aren't keeping up with how expensive it is to live. And then to make things even worse, you've got limited social mobility, which makes it almost impossible for people to climb out of poverty.
So you're saying that not only is it ridiculously expensive to live in Hong Kong, but on top of that, a lot of people aren't earning enough to keep up. And to add insult to injury, the systems that are supposed to help people are failing.
Unfortunately, yes. That's the reality for many people there. And that leads us to another really important concern the report brings up, which is the question of whether Hong Kong's social welfare system can even sustain itself.
And this is where things start to get even more concerning, right? The report talks about how much Hong Kong depends on taxes to keep its social safety net afloat, and it seems like that might not be enough anymore. Can you tell us more about that?
Right, so you've got this system that relies super heavily on taxes to pay for everything. But the thing is, Hong Kong's population is getting older, which means they're going to need even more social services, like healthcare and elderly care, which just puts a massive strain on their budget, especially when you consider how many people are already struggling just to get by.
It's like trying to, fill up a bathtub with a leaky faucet while the drain's wide open. The demand just keeps growing, but the resources are so limited and the system itself is full of holes.
That's a perfect way to put it. And that's exactly what the report is saying. They're saying that social welfare costs are going to be absolutely enormous. They're projecting something like HK $77.4 billion, which is, let me check my notes, almost US $10 billion, just for the 2024-25 fiscal year. That's an insane amount of money, even for a place as wealthy as Hong Kong.
Right, especially considering they haven't even balanced their budget in, 4 out of the last 5 years? Not to mention their financial reserves have totally shrunk since 2019. It's definitely a little worrying.
It's a big deal for sure. And it brings up this really important question. If this tax-funded system is already struggling so much, what other options do they have? What can they do to make things more sustainable and actually make sure people's needs are met?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It feels like every solution has its own set of challenges.
Absolutely. And one thing the report really stresses is that they have to address income inequality directly. It's not just about providing a safety net. They need to figure out why this gap exists in the first place.
So how do you even begin to tackle something as huge and complicated as income inequality? Where do you even start?
Well, they have a few ideas. One thing they suggest is looking into making the tax system more progressive. So instead of everyone paying the same rate, people who earn more would contribute a higher percentage of their income. That way, the burden wouldn't fall so heavily on the people who are already struggling to make ends meet.
So basically, it's about asking those who can afford it to contribute more so the system can actually support those who are struggling. It definitely feels a lot fairer, especially when you see just how massive the gap is between the rich and the poor in Hong Kong.
Exactly. The goal is for everyone to contribute their fair share based on how much they can actually afford.
Makes sense. But wouldn't that be a really hard sell to the people who are already at the top?
For sure, it's a huge change in mindset, and there's always going to be pushback when it comes to taxes. But the report's point is that it's a conversation they have to have if they want a system that works for everyone, not just the wealthy.
Right, so we've got potential tax reform on the table. What else are they suggesting?
Another big thing is investing in human capital. That means focusing on education and job training to give people the skills they need to get ahead in today's job market. It's about giving people the tools to work their way out of poverty.
So instead of just catching people when they fall, they want to provide a way for them to climb up and achieve actual financial stability.
Exactly. It's about creating a system that promotes upward mobility and removes the obstacles that keep people stuck in poverty.
That sounds like a more well-rounded approach. Tackle income inequality head-on while giving people the means to improve their own lives.
Right. It's about making sure the system works for everyone, not just a select few.
Earlier, we were talking about how expensive it is to live in Hong Kong, especially housing costs. Does the report say anything about that?
It definitely does. They actually point to the housing crisis as a major factor contributing to poverty in Hong Kong. Try to imagine having to spend more than half your income just on rent. That doesn't leave much for anything else, like food, transportation, healthcare.
It's really tough to think about families having to make those kinds of choices, Like, do we keep a roof over our heads or do we put food on the table?
It's the reality for a lot of people, unfortunately. And the report suggests that fixing the housing problem is going to take a whole bunch of different approaches. Things like making more public housing available, offering rental assistance to families who are really struggling, even thinking about totally new housing models that are actually affordable.
So it's not as simple as just building more apartments. It's about making sure that everyone can afford to live in them.
Exactly. Everyone deserves a safe, affordable place to live.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening. We've talked about some pretty shocking statistics, some really complex issues, and some potential solutions. But it's obvious that poverty in Hong Kong, and really anywhere in the world, is a really complicated issue with no easy answers.
You got that right. It really takes understanding all the different pieces of the puzzle. The social stuff, the economics, even the politics. And it's going to take everyone working together, coming up with new ideas, and being willing to change the way things are.
For our listeners who might be feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this, what's the one thing you hope they take away from our deep dive today?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that these aren't just numbers we're talking about. These are real people's lives. And as big as these challenges seem, they're not impossible to overcome. When we shine a light on these issues, have real conversations about them, and demand change, we can actually make a difference and make the world a fairer place for everyone.
That's a great point to end on. Thank you so much for breaking all of this down for us. It's a conversation that we definitely need to keep having.
I completely agree. It was my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive got you thinking and maybe even inspired you to learn more. Remember, even small actions can have a big impact. We'll see you on our next deep dive into another fascinating topic.